AncientRomeWithAmy. In this video I'm going to be talking about language learning in general and my experiences with it since middle school, I guess. So a timeline of events would be in 1993 and 1994 I was in middle school and taking Latin, and then I forgot all about it because I took Spanish in high school and then Spanish, French, and German in college. Majored in German, minored in French and anthropology, and studied for a while in Germany and Austria. So I figure at least 16 years of formal, like in-person language classes, as well as, taking things online and studying in my free time for the past 13 years, which adds up to about 29 years of studying or working with foreign languages. And I've worked as a German translator since 2009. I was in Germany and Austria about 16 years ago. Ich habe ein Teddybärchen. Teddy's Rotenborg. Und das ist nur 7 Euro gekostet. Hello, Teddybärchen. So earlier this year, in 2022, I started buying Latin books. And I started out with AncientRomeWithAmy 1 and 2 because that's what my original Latin teacher used, and it has like nostalgic value. And what I like about AncientRomeWithAmy, and everybody still, my class still remembers this, it's like, in pictorias puella Romana nomine Cornelia. The illustrations allow you to not rely so much on the English vocabulary and translations. So you can sort of go through the Latin story and look at the pictures and say, okay, rather than, translating to say, okay, there's a girl in the picture, you look at the picture and you associate the word puella with the girl in the picture, like the image of a young girl rather than the English word girl. And then I've also been watching things on YouTube, like general language learning videos, like those from Ollie Richards, have been helpful because, especially I think it was in his video about Mormon missionaries learning languages quickly, but he's done like a million on different languages and different people learning them. Anyway, the idea that speaking, writing, reading, and listening are all like distinct and separate, and they all need to be worked on sort of separately, even though they feed off each other. So that's been useful. Like I've talked to people who were, just because of pandemic isolation, felt like they were not speaking their native language as fluently as they, would be expected to, just because they weren't, literally weren't around people and not talking to people. So, and if that can happen with your native language just from not using it, just imagine what happens with your second, third, fourth, fifth languages if you're not using them. With Latin, I probably started out with Scorpio Martianus channel for listening to the Lingua Latina Comprehensibilis videos first, and then whatever else in that order, because it's good to have some clearly spoken and slower videos, with slower speaking at first, and then move on to the more natural speaking videos with more vocabulary and more difficult grammar. But you need to have the listening comprehension first, or you're not going to do well with the Latin spoken at a normal pace or ancient texts and things where people were giving complicated speeches and things. You can't just jump right into it when you don't know any grammar. And also the LLPSI videos, I have these here. I have Familia Romana and Roma Eterna. And there are a lot of people, I think, who have also gone through those and, done the dialogues and the stories and things. And that can be useful just to read along while you're looking through the book, which is also important because you have to hear it in order to imagine how it sounds correctly in your mind, or else you could, pick up bad pronunciation habits, which I'm still dealing with because I'm just so used to Germanic languages, I suppose. Which also brings me to Erberg and LLPSI, Lingua Latina per se illustrata. Found in Antiquity did a great video addressing the idea that, it won't make you magically fluent or anything, and there is some basically over-enthusiastic information about it online. It's a good series for what it is, but as with any resource at all, if you use it as your only resource, it's not going to be good enough for you to be proficient in a language. So I think her channel addressed that pretty well. And it should basically that it's a good resource to have and to use, but it should be supplemented with other resources. And I say the same about literally any resource, that it should never be your only resource. And I think a lot of people do that with, like, should I just use this one app or this one book? And, like, the answer is no. Get that and use other things too. Some books, like I've looked at some Greek books, they can be pretty expensive, and I understand if you don't want to buy, like, a huge amount of books that cost, like, $80 a piece or something. But there are resources online and free resources that you could start out with, and then maybe consider buying other books and things as hard copies in the future. You know, with the internet, you can really just have so many resources that you can't even use them all because there's just not time in the day. So I haven't tried any of the language learning apps on that note because, like, I'm an old person and I don't do, like, phone apps really. But I'm sure they're the same as any other resource. I had to dig this out of a box. I got this out. So perhaps you can have a laugh. When I started trying to learn Russian, Express Track to Russian, Barons. Check this out. A bunch of cassette tapes. There's a textbook and a workbook in here. But that's the sort of thing I would buy like 20 years ago. It serves a lot of the same purposes as using the apps, which have things like audio files, and, you know, you type in the answers to the written or audio prompts. But it's also the importance of having the audio, what was that other one that had, that other tape series? Maybe I'll edit it in when I remember the words, but they did not come with a workbook, and it was just like, listen to these tapes and like talk back to them or something, or repeat after them, which is like a good skill to have. But like, I had the French ones, and there's just no way in hell that you're going to read French after only hearing it. I mean, just again, go back to children learning. You know, French children, they learn some by hearing, but eventually they go to school and learn the written language. So, I mean, if you want to learn the writing too, I think it's important to have, you know, audio and text. Russian things around here. Jack McDevitt. I've never heard of him. The half-price books. I used to get so many things there. A lot of novels and things in French and German. Some of these were $1 a piece. I got some Sartre, the Nausée. I mostly have him and Camus in English translation. I've completely lost my spoken French, and I've lost my train of thought as well. So anyway, the strength of LLPSI is getting you away from relying too much on translation, but it has its weaknesses as well, especially if it's the only thing you're using at all. Our first German grammar, this was from like 1917. I mean, the first thing in German I had at all, and I learned this before I went back to college, because I took a couple years off. Yeah, I worked through this like religiously, and it's written in the Frakturschrift, which for English speakers resembles Old English. It's just one of those, you know, black letter fonts. I think there's some Sutherland Schrift in here. I did a video on that. But this relies heavily on just beating the grammar into you, like going through it, because German has feminine, masculine, and neuter nouns like Latin does. And it's more heavily declined than, you know, French or Spanish. So that was useful just in the, like, huge amounts of repetition and really making sure you have a hang of the grammar for German. But again, even then, I was, like, listening to music in German. I used to go jogging and listening to my Sony micro disc player, which was like, had all their albums to that time on there, you know, up to Mary Shelley's Frankenstein as a translation, an Animal Farm, I have some Kafka. I have about 1 million Duden books, and in Germany I used to do my daily journal in these. Well, nowadays I don't use the workbooks because I use German every day for work, but I do listen to like DW Deutsch on YouTube. But yeah, as for immersion, you know, sometimes that's not possible because just for financial reasons, or if it's an ancient language that's not spoken in that way anymore or at all, you can't do the immersion thing. But, you know, with modern languages such as, you know, German, French, Italian, Spanish, if you can go to one of the countries that speak them, that's great. Like I did study briefly in Germany and Austria, And I also took a lot of pictures of things in Latin. There are a lot of Latin inscriptions in churches and cathedrals and things. A lot of like donors to churches and clergy that had died, and sometimes they had their bones there and such. And in fact, last week in my own hometown, they let us into a church that's under renovation, and there is a priest there, and I was able to read his Latin inscription there. So that was cool. I mean, you can find Latin inscriptions and things, and you don't necessarily have to be in Italy or in the Vatican City or something. And also there's the idea of multiple resources, whereas like if I got sick of Ecce Romani, I would just like move on to LLPSI or watch YouTube videos or something, because it's not always that the book is at fault or you're at fault. It's just you're sick of that particular book and its teaching methods. So rather than say, well, to hell with this entire language, you just say, well, I'm sick of Ecce Romani and I'm going to watch some YouTube videos right now. And that's, a way to be using the language every day and not necessarily having to go, have to use one book and go, first lesson, second lesson, and so on, because, people get sick of things, or you don't like the teaching method, or you don't like, or the subject matter doesn't interest you. And also on the TextKit forums, they have a lot of written resources. There's like a sub-forum for that. And again, you need the vocab and grammar to be able to get really into them. And I'm not always overly fond of the ones that have the line-by-line English translation right under the Latin, because then you might be too tempted to just read the English. So I prefer like a vocab list or none at all, depending. Unlike how LLPSI does it, I mean, sometimes if you have to look up things in your native language, I think that's fine, or, ask questions in your native language if you're in our class. I mean, depending on the teacher and such, but it's okay as long as it's not a crutch. I mean, you use whatever is at hand in order to learn better. And it took a bit longer on that note to get into Alexius Kasanis' videos about about random things that he does in Latin. I think one of the first ones I watched, he was talking about American snack cakes, like Hostess snack cakes or something. Like, you don't necessarily find that on other channels or uploads that are as frequent, and just talking about whatever is in front of him or whatever's on his mind. So I do watch his whenever they come out now, because that's just it's a useful resource, just like how I listen to the news in German. And it's good to pick up other vocabulary, or, you get to a word that you can't really figure out from the context, and maybe you have to look it up, but that's fun too. And also trying to learn things by context clues, just like you would with an unfamiliar word in your native language. But as for the writing part of things, there are a couple things I'd point out, like the book exercises. Your declension charts are good for reference, and then this one has a lot of, exercises like the subject of a sentence will be one person, or it'll be a girl, and they'll say, like, change it so it says it's a boy, or change it to, plural, change it to past tense, whatever. Or just answer the questions, in full sentences. So those are useful and also give you some repetition, but I think eventually nothing is as good as a combination of reading, writing, speaking, and listening. And with reading, you can sort of gloss over words you don't know and still get the meaning, like from the context, and this is helpful for reading and an important skill, but it may not help as much with speaking or writing. And writing and speaking aren't the same either, because you can write slowly, and you can look up words and polish what you were writing, basically. Whereas with speaking, you have to come up with the words in real time, which can be frustrating, but the most important thing about being frustrated is it tells you exactly what you need to work on. Whether it's grammar or you just need more vocabulary around a certain topic. And let's see, fluency. Fluency can mean different things, and I'm not really a big fan of the word, but if I needed to make a definition, it would be something like, if you don't know a word, you're able to, like, sort of dance around it and say a lot of different things that mean the same thing in order to, help somebody else help you find the word. Like, if I don't know a word in German, I can give a long explanation of sort of what it is, and I think having enough command of the language to be able to talk about things you don't know the word for is pretty important. And that, and just, coping in whatever situations you need it for. So that's also context dependent. Like, if you are translating certain types of documents, you might only need certain types of vocabulary. Whereas I've done, medical, and I do university documents and legal documents, and I've done, poetry and such as well. Family letters. So I kind of get all the sorts of subject matter. But, no matter how long you've been studying a language, there will always be words you don't know. Whether it's a loan word from another language, or it's some really obscure medical term or scientific term. Even in your native language, there are words that you won't know, and you'll have to explain sort of what is the context, and, what does this mean, or can I look it up, or whatever. But also, when it comes to speaking and writing, that's also a big reason I got into making YouTube videos. And I know a lot of people don't want to, because they're like, well, what if I make a mistake? But making a mistake is going to happen in any language. So it's not so much that you can't make mistakes as you can't beat yourself up for it. That just tells you what you need to work on. And if somebody is criticizing you, your speaking or writing, and not coming up with anything of their own, you just realize that their opinion doesn't matter at all. They just like to criticize people on the internet or something, it doesn't reflect on you. So I guess read the Stoics, and you'll be able to reframe your thoughts when it comes to criticism, and not internalizing other people's negativity. But, as an example, I've been playing through Tomb Raider and Silent Hill, and if there's something in the game that I don't know the word for, I know that that's some vocabulary I need to look up. But that's just one other way of, using repetition and figuring things out from where you find yourself frustrated or struggling. And I also talk back to YouTube videos, and I talk to my dogs, and, I talk to myself. And again, that just, you can't care what other people say about that. But basically, I just say, to use whatever resources are available to you, whether that's physical books or as well as, all the stuff that's on the internet, apps, YouTube videos, websites, scans of books that are available online that are, out of print or whatever. And also do things that you're interested in. If you like history, read history. If you like art, read about art or watch art videos. Music, movies, novels in translation. I picked up a lot of novels in translation when I was in Germany. And I think many people are put off by, just looking at one textbook, or looking at a boring textbook, or having a teacher they don't like, or a class they think is boring, and they blame the language itself. Rather than saying to themselves, well, I just don't have enough resources, I'll move on to another book or another class, other resources. I know a lot of people, I've met a lot of people who hate Latin, and it's because they didn't like their textbook or they didn't like their teacher. And I don't think it's necessarily that they hate the language. They just didn't use enough resources, and they got bored and lost interest. And also a lot of people do that with classes too. Like, they think, if I take a class two or three times a week, or once a week, or whatever, if they do that, they will somehow become fluent, and it doesn't work that way. If you put in 0 time outside of class, you don't really apply yourself in class either, then it doesn't matter if you're majoring in the language, you'll never get any good with it. Also, when I was in Germany with some of my other students from the US, people would, not do anything in German and just only talk to people in English. Spend the money to take the class and fly over. I feel like you should take advantage of the resources that you went to see, but, it's their money, whatever. Feel free to agree or disagree, or put any questions or comments in the YouTube comments. But thanks for watching. And now my throat is dry from talking too much. Like, hey, Mickey.